What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
Stephen Kotler, man, it's almost been 5 years since you've been on the Learning Leader Show. So welcome. It's good to have you back.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
I want to start with a quote that you start your latest book with. I'll read it and then I want to talk a little bit about it. Here it is. Ever since you were a little kid, you always have a dream about what you can accomplish. As soon as you get close to that dream, there's another. There's always a desire to keep learning, to keep evolving. Here's the line. Let's tickle it a bit. And then you figure out that's not actually the line. The impossible is actually a little farther out. So let's go over there and tickle it again. You do this for long enough and you just get used to it. This is from Miles Dasher, who is a pro base jumper. And this, Stephen, is a great place, I think, to start because it really grabbed me when you start your book this way, because I've had the good fortune, I know you have too, of meeting with a lot of Navy SEALs and special operators, and they are masters at what they would call pushing their edges. And that's what I gathered from this quote, and that's what I gathered from how you're starting your book. Can you talk to me a little bit about the impossible and understanding the value of pushing your edges as you try to lead others?
So let's define terms on the front end because it's probably useful. The Art of Impossible is a book. I've spent 30 years studying those moments in time when the impossible became possible in every domain you could possibly imagine. So these could be physical impossibles, athletic impossibles, the 4-minute mile. These could be cultural impossibles, Rosa Parks sitting at the front of the bus. These could be intellectual impossibles, Einstein's theory of relativity, and on and on. These are capital I impossibles, that which has never been done. The Art of Impossible is actually a book about how do you accomplish what I would call small I impossible, which is those things we think are impossible for us. And you know, the really simple example I give in the book is I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, which was in the 70s, blue collar steel mill town, you know, in the middle of a massive depression. And I wanted to be a writer from the time I was a little kid. I didn't know any writers. I didn't know how you became a writer. It was like waking up one morning and being like, Mom, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be an elf. Right. I mean, like, I had no idea how you do that. And that's what I mean by small I impossible. I didn't believe it was possible for me. I had no idea how to get from point A to point B, and statistically, really poor odds of success. Right now, small I impossible. This could be overcoming poverty, rising out of poverty. This could be overcoming trauma. This is an impossible I think everybody has to solve in their lifetime, which is how do you get paid doing what you love, what you're passionate about, right? That's small I impossible. It's almost mandatory. I think for most people, most of us, the very first small I impossible we ever get after, how do I get my first kiss? How do I get my first boyfriend, girlfriend, right? Like those are small I impossibles. When you're 11, 12 years old, you just be like, oh, boys, girls, what is this whole sex thing, sexuality thing, right? I want some of this. You don't even you're like, what? How do you, right? That kind of thing. I think becoming world-class at anything you do is a small I impossible. I think trying to make a living as a creative is a small I impossible. This list obviously goes on and on and on. And it turns out, here's the really crazy thing, and I'll tell you a story that kind of exemplifies it a little bit. I've been in the room more times when like science fiction ideas became science fact technology, or when somebody did something athletically that has never been done before in history, probably more than any other human being on the planet. And I have the whole time been using the terms of neuroscience and psychology to try to figure out what's going on in their brain when they're pulling this off. And yet in all of this, I've met nobody who set out to accomplish capital impossible. Met no one. Everybody sets out to do exactly what Miles talked about. Small I impossible. Oh shit, I pulled that off. What's next? Oh, what's next? oh, what's next? And he's not wrong when he says you get used to it. In fact, one of the things that is the view on the inside is always so much different than the view on the outside. And the view on the inside, when you talk to people who have accomplished the impossible, they will tell you that it's like they just did what was next. It was like eating breakfast. It might have been this incredible thing from the outside. For them, it was the thing that was in front of them and they did next. And here's a classic example. The first time I met big wave surfer Laird Hamilton, I was about 27, he was about 33. And at this point, he was pretty much the most widely acknowledged, biggest badass on the planet. Tow and surfing just happened. He was the guy who was pioneering Jaws. Nobody had ever seen anything like a human being on a 50-foot wave before. And it was, it was the birth of those big wave moments were sort of the birth of what is talked about in action sports as the era of impossible, where like more never been done, never going to be done feats were done than ever before in history in any activity. And surfing got kicked off pretty much with the big wave stuff. And I was talking to Laird, he said, man, people they see me on a 50-foot wave and they go, oh man, Laird, that's impossible. I could never do that. And he says, you know what they didn't see is me on a 3-foot wave when I was 3 years old, or me on a 4-foot wave when I was 4 years old, or me on a 5-foot wave at 5 years old. They see me on a 50-foot wave at age 33 and they think, man, that's impossible. And they also didn't see me last week on a wave that was 49 and a half feet tall. And so today they see the 50-footer and they go, oh man, that's impossible. And what I'm really thinking is, Laird, come on, you went 49 and a half feet last week to now you're just pushing it 6 inches. Come on. That's what I mean by that.
It's just the next incremental step. It's like, it feels to me like for the person listening who's not a big wave surfer or an action sports person, maybe they're leading a team or trying to build culture. It's not about becoming the CEO of a billion-dollar company. It's about the next step. As maybe Alison Levine, who summited Mount Everest, she would say, I focus on the 3 feet in front of me, the 3 feet in front of me, the 3 feet in front of me. And before you know it, she's standing on top of Mount Everest. Stephen, how would you relate that to the person who is not in action sports, who is not a surfer, but they're doing it in the world of leading a team within a company?
There's a great term that comes out of action sports that I think is applicable in exactly these situations, because this is what we're talking about. The term in action sports is progression. You sometimes hear that in the military also, but that's exactly what you're talking about, right? The urge to mastery, the urge to all these things is about becoming addicted to just those next 3 feet, the next 3 feet, the next 3 feet. And this is not saying don't set the kind of big goals. You know what I mean? There's a place for those kind of things, but what you're doing right here, right now is just the next step. And that's easy because anybody can take the next step. I always say that the funny thing is about accomplishing super hard goals, and I don't care what, right? I mean, I started studying action sport athletes, but I spent way more time studying business leaders to accomplishing hard goals, right? My book Bold is all about Elon Musk, Larry Page, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson, guys who built world-changing companies in near record time, and often in places that nobody even thought you could start a company or run a business. Branson with Virgin Galactic, or even Virgin Air, right? When everybody in the world thought it was a terrible idea that this music tycoon suddenly has an airline, right? On and on and on. And you just see the same thing. The passion is for like the incremental improvement, because the other thing is there is no such thing as big improvements. And I'll give you the classic business example. The most terrifying thing a boss of a big corporation can say to his corporation is, you know what we need to do? We need to innovate. That's right. Everybody gets terrified at that moment in time. And it's because it's for a lot of different reasons, but the big sweeping changes that's not how it works, right? Organizations are complex systems. Sometimes they can change very rapidly, But as a general rule, it's cascade effects, little step, little step, little step, little step, and suddenly you have momentum and you get a cascade effect, right? You get exponential growth, but the initial doublings in any exponential are always very small. And in peak performance, right, which is what I've studied, the core lesson of peak performance, which is why it so dovetails so nicely into what kind of Miles was talking about, we've been talking about this morning, is peak performance is nothing more or less than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. And peak performance always works like compound interest. It's a tiny little bit today, it's a tiny little bit tomorrow, it's a tiny little bit the day after. Let me give you a classic business example of that. So my new book, The Art of Impossible, opens with a look at kind of motivation, intrinsic drive. Then it looks at goal setting and what we know about goal setting, and into grit. And we put those three things together, and you have the category that scientists talk about as motivation. It's those sets of skills. And if you get everything right, basically you start getting a tremendous amount of motivation for free, meaning you don't have to burn a lot of calories to pay attention to things or do the work. It happens almost automatically. And you end up with something that I've dubbed the habit of ferocity. And the habit of ferocity is something you see in all great leaders, I think. And it's the ability to automatically and instinctively rise to any challenge, to lean in almost before you realize you're leaning in. And let's talk about why this is important. You have the habit of ferocity. Most people, when you encounter a difficulty, a hard moment, and in business, as a guy who runs a company, I have about 5 moments every day where I'm like, oh shit, there's a decision, right? There are lives on the other end of this. There's a lot of money on the other end of this. There's a whatever, it's a thing. And people with the habit of ferocity, most people, when that shit comes up, they dither a little bit. They get panicky, they think, they react, they have a lot of emotions. There's a bunch of stuff. And then they make the damn decision anyways, right? Because you have to make the damn decision anyways, because you're a leader, you're running, like, you have to make the decision. With the habit of ferocity, maybe you don't waste 5 minutes messing around, right? It's just 5 minutes. Who cares? But if it's 5 decisions a day and it's 5 minutes a day that you're saving by having all your intrinsic motivators properly aligned and your goals properly set and your grit skills properly developed, just this one thing, 5 minutes a day per problem, get 5 problems a day, it's 25 minutes a day, 3.5 hours a week, and it's 3.5 weeks a year. 3.5 weeks a year you get back. How do leaders get so far ahead of the competition? It's not a big thing. It's no one big idea. It's incremental compound interest, 5 minute saves here, 5 minutes save there. That's how you really add up. And that's why it's interesting. Oftentimes, kind of the way to these hard goals, you have to sort of follow your biology to get there, but they're a lot easier to get to than most people suspect, because the system does a lot of the work for you.
All right, if you're cool with it, Stephen, I'd love to bounce around between some of the deep dives I did within your book. Is that cool?
Let's do it.
Let's go with the Bannister effect to start. So first of all, can you describe what the Bannister effect is and what role it plays in our ability to
accomplish anything?
Accomplish anything big.
Anything. Yeah. I don't even know if it's anything big. I think it's anything. Like any of our goals. So here's the puzzle. Roger Bannister, as everybody pretty much knows, was the first person to run a sub 4 minute mile. And he did it in 1954. And it took forever to get there. If you look at mile times, they drop like half a second a decade or something, second a decade, maybe for like 70, 80 years leading up to it, right? We didn't so much like run through the 4 minute mile as I crawled our way there. And it was a total impossible. Like, there are New York Times op-eds, they're really funny to look at now, written by doctors, saying, first guy to run a 4 minute mile, there should be a ticker tape parade and a hearse waiting for them at the finish line because they're going to die trying. Like, these are major doctors. And Bannister runs the 4 minute mile, of course, a very big deal. But here's the puzzle. Here's the part of the story most people don't know. 3 weeks later, somebody breaks his record. 3 months after that, somebody shatters that record. Within 5 years, a teenager has done it. The question then is, what the hell changes, right? It takes us 80 years, a second a decade, right, to get to this thing, and yet somebody does it, and suddenly the act of accomplishing the impossible makes the impossible easier for everybody else to accomplish. What the hell is going on, right? Because nothing, the physical skill doesn't change. All it changes is the mental frame we build around the challenge. What used to be as impossible is now seen as possible, and suddenly it's a whole lot more possible. This is the Bannister effect, and it's been a long-standing puzzle. And the really short version of what the hell's going on is there's an incredibly tight coupling between the visual system, which occupies almost 30 to 40% of your brain, and your physiology. You literally cannot accomplish the impossible until you can see yourself accomplishing the impossible for a lot of sort of complicated reasons. But that's the Bannister effect. And it's one of the reasons people do so many athletic visualizations, right? You hear athletes talking about positive self-talk and visualization and all that stuff. And it's leaked into the business world a lot as well. And you're seeing a lot of business leaders using some of these same techniques. And one of the reasons is you have to be able to see yourself doing it before you can do it. And it builds up the pattern memory of it ahead of time. And it's a little trickier, right? Your brain also has a built-in bullshit detector, right? So affirmations don't work, gratitude does work. Why? The reason is because your brain has a built-in bullshit detector. And if you look in the mirror and you're like, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, and your brain is going, dude, you work at Walmart. What the hell are you talking about? Right? That's actually demotivating. It puts you in the opposite direction. It does not actually unlock what you're trying to unlock in the brain. Gratitude works because I am so happy and grateful that I woke up this morning and I could breathe and my limbs all worked. Well, that's true. And that's a good thing. And what happens then, the brain starts going, oh, there are things to be grateful for. There's things you've got. You're safer. You're more secure. And I don't have to spend so much time showing you things to be afraid of in your life. I can show you new possibilities, new opportunities, and it alters perception, right? Gratitude works on perception much more than anything else. And the same thing sort of works with the Bannister effect, right? The Bannister effect is just sort of like a gratitude practice writ large, but neurobiologically, it's sort of similar. But you have to sort of step there gradually, right? If you're picking an impossible that you can't wrap your head around, right? If you've never, ever, ever put on hiking shoes and your impossible is, I want to climb Everest. The visualization you don't want is you climbing Everest. The visualization you want is, you climbing the local hill and then you climbing the next hill. And you know what I mean? You have to stage it out in such a way that it's believable to yourself.
So it can't be something. So setting the grand goal is actually, you need it, but
you want it, but you don't. When you're using these tools along the way, you want to chunk it down so that you're stretching but not snapping.
How do you do this with writing a book? Because I'm in the process of this as well. I'm curious because for me, I actually set extremely low word count per day goals because the hardest part is getting going. Once you get started, I can go and I'm pretty good, but the hard part is the blank page or whatever it may be. How do you implement this for yourself?
Yeah, so I have a whole workshop that I teach called Flow for Writers that deals with all this stuff. So to answer that question, it is useful if I talk a little bit about flow first.
Okay.
So whenever you see peak human performance, you're seeing flow. Flow amplifies a tremendous amount of different things: motivation, productivity, grit, creative problem solving, learning rates go up, cooperation, collaboration, perception, a couple other things. Optimal performance. Doesn't matter what you're doing. That's the state of optimal performance. Flow states also have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. The most important trigger is what's known as the challenge skills balance. Here's in a nutshell, flow follows focus. The state can only show up when all of our attention is in the right here, the right now. So neurobiologically, that's what all the triggers do. They drive attention into the now, and they do it a bunch of different ways. Doesn't matter. But we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task at hand slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch, but not snap, right? That's peak learning, peak everything is right there, and very much applies to writing. So now that said, when I start a book, I don't know exactly where I'm going. It's early on. I write 500 words a day. When I'm in the middle of a book and I have a better idea of what's going on, I will write 750 to 850 words a day. When I'm finishing a book and I really know what I'm doing, I will write 12 to 1500 words a day. So that it grows over time. And by the way, if I wake up one morning, my energy is incredibly low. I'm really tired. I never will go under 500 words, but if I'm really tired or something, there's something emotionally going on that's really difficult, whatever, I may lower my word count a little bit to meet my energy. Usually I find myself going harder anyways and going after the bigger word count because I sort of feel guilty along the way. But I will, to lower the anxiety level at the front end, I'll say, look, you're really tired, whatever. Today was going to be 1,000 words, but only do 600 words, right? Because I want to keep it in that challenge skills sweet spot. Because if you get out of it, you start producing too much anxiety, you get too much norepinephrine. And especially for writing, the more anxiety, the more norepinephrine in your system after a certain threshold, the more logical and linear your brain becomes. So it becomes a big dampener. Anxiety can be a huge dampener on creativity. So I want to guard against that by not giving myself an overwhelming challenge. I just want a challenge that's difficult, but like once I accomplish it, I can have that sense of accomplishment as well. Does that make sense?
It does. So do you ever miss?
Four or five times, maybe.
What is it that causes you to miss, and how do you feel when you do?
So I, again, flow for writers stuff, this is actually some of the stuff in Creativity and Art Impossible. So writer's block, as a general rule, when you have real problems, when you really can't get anything out, there tend to be three major causes. The most common is you don't know your starts and your endings. So your brain is a really good pattern detection, pattern recognition machine. But if it doesn't know where you're starting, it doesn't know where you're going, it can't plot a course in between. So first major cause of writer's block is usually like my outline isn't crisp enough. I don't know where my section is supposed to end. Right. What I do, Ryan, when I write 500 words, my clear goals list for the day will read, write 500 words in the new book that leaves the reader feeling awe or terror, or right. I want, like, what is my accomplishment and what is the main thing I want my reader to feel on the other end of that. That's a different approach to writing than a lot of people take. A lot of people are like, what's the information I'm trying to convey? That's a starts and endings thing. But like books are, unless it's your favorite 4 or 5 books, if I ask you about a book you like but don't love, tell me about it. You're going to tell me 3 or 4 or 5 things. You're going to remember 3 or 4 or 5 facts, and mostly how did the book make you feel? So I am less concerned about the facts in a sense and more about the feelings, because that's truly what's going to stay with my readers long term.
So you're focused more on kind of the emotional side of how somebody feels, more so than even
you understand, I'm sort of a content master, right? I've got 30 years as a journalist and so I know that's going to get taken care of. I don't worry about, like, I write in layers. First layer is first time I'll do 500 words through a thing. Yeah, I'm just throwing down the bare bones: who, what, where, why, when. Just trying to get that on the page. Then I'll do a second pass, and that second pass is all the what we're talking about, content. It's all the how do I prove the things that I'm saying along the way. This, I could be proving it by quoting somebody. I could be proving it by, laying out a science experiment or giving you some history or whatever. That gets layered in second, and style goes on last. This is another way to protect against writer's block. So another thing that often goes wrong is if you lock into a style very early on, as you know, because you've written a bunch, your style. Malcolm McLuhan was right when the medium is the message, right? Style will dictate content, and I don't want style to dictate content until I know what the freaking content is. So I discovered early on, I would get myself into trouble because I like the craft of writing. I like the art of writing. I can do fancy things with words sometimes, and I like it, and it's fun. And I will get, like, I'll write a great first sentence, super sexy, super cool, and it'll lock me in to, oh God, if it's this kind of sentence, you got to write this way and support it that way. I think a lot of tasks are not like that also, but writing is really very much that, where your initial decisions will drive so much else. So I try to stall on some of those things, but this is very writing specific stuff. But
well, it's kind of like when you read in From Motivation to Code chapter, the first line, and it's just one line, at least in the digital version of the book. The central premise of this book is that impossible has a formula. And I know part of the job of a writer is to earn the right for the reader to continue to read or to turn the page. And when I see that impossible has a formula, I am immediately thinking, what's the formula? What can I take from this to implement into my life to make me better, a better husband, a better leader, a better boss, a better dad, whatever it may be. And so I feel like I sometimes I like to deconstruct a sentence like that because it seems basic and simple, but it's not. It's that you had to really think about the central premise of this book is that impossible has a formula. Can you deconstruct that one sentence for me?
sure. I mean, I'll take it. I'll take it one better, because this is actually how I think about writing. So neurobiologically, so it really matters to me that my readers have fun along the way. My job is to blow your minds, the quality of the information, and the artistry. And so if I want to propel a reader through a book, and it's an honor to me. It takes about 6-7 hours to read one of my books. We are busy people in the modern world. Somebody's going to give me 6-7 hours. I want to give them something really rewarding along the way. And so how do you drive a reader through a book? Well, underneath curiosity, excitement, engagement, you wanted to go on. So that is what is technically known as a norepinephrine close. Norepinephrine is the neurochemical that underpins curiosity. If I get you asking the question, what is that formula? I'm driving a little norepinephrine into your system. Here's the cool thing about doing that. Norepinephrine increases focus and excitement, also increases learning rates. So I got you excited. You're going to read more, but I've also made you a better reader and a better learner now.
Wow. Okay. I want to shift to our own potential. One of, I think, the key things that you help people do with what you speak about on stage and what you write about in books is creating the habit of living up to our own potential. And people listening and watching, that's what they're thinking about is how do I maximize what I've been given, or maximize and get everything out of what I have. So based on what you've learned from the Art of the Impossible and all of your flow research, how does the individual who's taking notes right now get into the habit of living up to their own potential?
Well, the whole point of art of impossible is that not only is peak performance just getting our biology to work for us rather than against us, that's actually a limited toolkit. That's not an endless toolkit. It's a set of tools. There are really kind of four major there are four major skill sets that are combined into peak performance: motivation, learning, creativity, and flow. So the real art of impossible is learning that, hey, wait a minute, there's an order to this process. There's a process, first of all, there's a formula, right? And by formula, I mean there's a reliable set of steps that anybody can use to go big. And the idea is, first of all, the other thing that you need to know is we're all designed to go big. We are built as a system, as a biological systems, to go after high, hard challenges. We are built to rise to our full potential. And here's the other thing that's super critical: not going big is bad for us. Not living up to our full potential is foundationally bad for us. And let me give you a really simple example. Motivation, as I said, is a catch-all term for drive, grit, and goals. Drive is a catch-all term for external drivers and internal drivers. Extrinsic rewards are things like money, sex, fame, the things outside of ourselves, right? That we will kind of go for and expend motivation on. And then there's intrinsic motivators. These are things like curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, right? We want to drive our own bus, and mastery with the skills to get better and better. If you look at so depression and anxiety are at near epidemic proportions in today's world. 1 out of 10 adults is going to be depressed over the course of the next year. Somebody's going to kill themselves once every 12 seconds. This is the largest drain on the world health economy, as anxiety and depression. These are the plagues of the modern world, and there are 8 known causes of anxiety and depression. 2 of them are what get most attention. 2 of them being genetics. I can't make enough serotonin, so I'm depressed, and or trauma. This really crappy thing happened to me, and that's why X, Y, Z. And it turns out, if you look under the hood of both of those at the science, genetics alone can never cause depression or anxiety. It's always genetics plus compounding factors. If you look at trauma, the vast majority of the time when we encounter trauma, it leads to post-traumatic growth, not post-traumatic stress disorder, right? What happens is Ernest Hemingway put it really well. The world breaks everyone, and afterwards many are stronger at the broken places. That's predominantly what happens to human beings. That's how the system is designed to work. If you look at all the other 6 causes of anxiety and depression, for example, lack of meaningful work is one of the major causes of depression. You know what lack of meaningful work actually means in simple language? It's work that I'm not curious about, I'm not passionate about, it's not aligned with my purpose or my values or my strengths. It doesn't afford me the opportunity for mastery. I can't get better and better at these things. And I'm not driving the own bus. I'm working for somebody else, and I don't get to call any of the shots. And to boot, it doesn't produce flow. That's right. When we are designed to rise to our full potential, we're designed to use this system in a very specific way. And when we don't, we pay a significant penalty with our mental and physical health.
There's so much to both the highs and the lows, and you touched on some of the problem areas. What have you experienced? Because like you spend so much time with action sport athletes. You're one of them. You've broken how many ribs or how many bones in your body have you broken over the course of your life?
82.
82. How many bones do we have?
More than that.
I mean, it's amazing. How do you see that those kind of, when I think of action sports, I'm sure there are other ones, but I remember just watching Shaun White be both a summer and winter games kind of champions on the skateboard, on the snowboard, half pipe, and there are plenty of others. People jumping out of airplanes, different types of things. But when you study them and you've spent a lot of time around them, how do they continue to push the bar, continue to defy what is possible on a regular basis. What I'm trying to uncover here is what we kind of average or normal. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why action sport athletes?
Yeah.
Why the error of impossible happen? Okay. So earlier I said flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. There are 22 known triggers for flow. There are probably way more, but that's just what scientists have discovered so far. And they all work the same way. As I said, they drive attention into the present moment. And the interesting thing is, whenever you see a culture of innovation, and this could be action sport athletes in the 1990s, this could be Silicon Valley, this could be Seattle birthing grunge rock in the 90s also. This could, on at Greenwich Village in the 60s, in the 50s and the 60s, birthing, or Harlem during the jazz renaissance, on and on and on. Whenever you see a culture of innovation, what you are seeing is a culture that has been built around flow's triggers. That's always, always, always what you see. And in fact, I'll give you a very good business example. So everybody knows pretty much that what a skunk work is. And skunk works have, for God, since the 1940s, when Lockheed Martin first invented them, have been how pretty much every major organization, from Walmart through Apple through Whole Foods, has innovated, right? And there are reasons for this, and we can go into all that. But if you go back to Kelly Johnson's original 14 rules for skunk, and Kelly Johnson was the aerospace engineer at Lockheed Martin who created the very first skunk works, all 14 of them are literally rules for producing flow. They're basically flow triggers, one way or another. And so from the very beginning, we've known that whenever the impossible becomes possible, flow has to play a major role. And one of the main things going on is people are building kind of flow triggers baked into their culture. And let me give you simple examples. So novelty, complexity, unpredictability, risk, and insight. Whenever we encounter any of those things, so novelty, I see something I've never seen before. Complexity, that's like perceptual vastness. You look up at the night sky and you see millions of stars and millions of galaxies, and you're like, oh my God, I'm looking back into time, blah, blah. Unpredictability, we know what that is, right? I don't know what's going to happen next. Risk, obviously. This could be physical risk or mental risk or emotional risk or intellectual risk or social risk. And insight, connecting two ideas together. Whenever we do any of those things, encounter any of those things, the brain releases dopamine. Dopamine is a focusing chemical. It's performance enhancing chemical. It's a reward chemical. It does a lot of different things in the brain. But it helps drive flow because it really produces focus and excitement. So those are all flow triggers. If you think about action sports, well, these are high risk environments, and then they're living environments. So there's lots of complexity and unpredictability and novelty, right? No two waves the same. No two, the snowpack from a moment to moment basis is going to change. And insight, action sports are all about insight. Oh, the terrain goes that way. I can sort of bank my snowboard off that fin and use gravity, right? It's all about these moments of kinesthetic pattern recognition. Think about Silicon Valley. Lots of risk taking, lots of novelty. Oh my God, the freaking culture is built on novelty, unpredictability, and complexity and insight, right? These are cultures where the things that the culture themselves prides themselves on, or the organization prides themselves on, that's how you do that. And it goes on, it goes on. There's more to it, but that's the shorthand version of it.
You've done some wild things. I want to pick one of I emailed with your team about some of these things. What about when you flew a MiG-17 Russian fighter jet? What's that all about?
Okay, so I have to tell you, you need a little bit of background for this to make any sense whatsoever. I started my career studying altered states of consciousness and the neurobiology of altered states of consciousness. Flow is one of them, but I also, my mentor, Dr. Andrew Newberg, he started looking at so-called mystical experiences. He was interested in oneness. This is very common in flow. Surfers feel one with the wave, or writers feel one with their words, right? Or coders or video game players, right? And it's mystical also, like Tibetan Buddhists, oneness with the universe. And so Andy Newberg is a University of Pennsylvania neuroscientist who figured out where that feeling comes from. I was also really interested in out-of-body and near-death experiences. Out-of-body experiences are very common. Both of these things are very common. Like 10% of the population experiences out-of-body or near-death experiences. So this is going to be a slightly longer story than you wanted, but it's the only way this can make any sense. When scientists first started looking at out-of-body and near-death experiences, before we even had terms for this, it was actually the Air Force who did all the early research. And the reason was they had introduced the stealth bombers or the stealth fighters, and suddenly pilots kept flying themselves into G-lock, gravity-induced loss of consciousness. It's where you bank a turn at 9 Gs and all the blood rushes out of your head and you pass out. And they were crashing these billion-dollar planes. So huge problem for the Air Force. And a guy named James Winery is charged with solving. He's a physiologist, and he takes 1,000 pilots in a giant centrifuge down in Texas, and he spins all of them into G-lock. And he starts to notice that as they're getting into G-lock, as they're starting to lose consciousness, some ridiculously high percentage of them are having out-of-body experiences. They don't even have terms for it at this time. He's calling them dreamlets. He doesn't even know what to put in his notes, because we don't even have the term. And if it goes on and on, people are reporting classic near-death experiences. So first you have the out-of-body, and then it's becoming what looks like a near-death experience. And we all know why. Okay, so that's the background. I've been writing about this. I've been studying this stuff. I'm fascinated by this research. I'm like, oh my God, G-lock, crazy. So I'm a journalist, and one of the secrets to being a really good journalist is you have to cultivate publicists as friends. And you get a really cool publicist who you work with and trusts you, and all kinds of crazy opportunities are going to come your way. Friend of mine was the publicist for Stolichnaya vodka. Russia loses the Cold War, right? And starts going bankrupt. And so the military starts selling off their MiG fighter jets. And Stoli buys a bunch of them. And they fly them to America, and they're going to take them on a tour. And my phone rings, and this guy says, "Hey, Steven, you want to fly in a MiG?" And I'm like, hell yes, do I want to fly in a MiG? Where am I going? And he tells me, how to get to the airport. And I get to the airport. And so it's a MiG trainer. Pilot sits in the back, co-pilot or the passenger sits in the front. And so there's, all kinds of, you steer from up front. And I just think I'm going for a ride. I don't know how to fly a plane. I've never been in a fighter jet before. I think I'm going for a ride in a MiG. That's all I know. So the pilot shows up, and he starts teaching me how to work the rudder and the stick. And I'm looking at him like, dude, I've never flown a plane before, right? He's like, yeah, just in case, I just want you to know. And I'm like, okay, whatever. If this is what I'm going through to get off the damn ground, this is what you right? How often do you get to fly in a MiG? So yeah, tell me how to work the damn rudder. We get 100 feet off the deck, and he says, "All right, man, you got the stick." I'm like, "What do you mean I got the stick?" He's like, "Yeah, fly the plane." And I'm like, "What do you mean fly the plane?" He's like, "There's nothing you can do that I don't think I can recover this plane from. So whatever you want to do, go ahead." And I was like, all of a sudden I'm like, "Well, could I fly it into G-lock?" And he's like, "You want to experience G-lock?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't have time to tell him, but I was like, yeah, there's some things about G-lock in a fighter jet that I've always had questions about. And I've been trying to solve this neurobiological puzzle." And he's like, "Well, so how do you fly a plane into G-lock?" First, we tried barrel rolls. And mind you, it turns out I have an incredibly high tolerance for G-forces. The guy told me afterwards I probably could have been a pilot or an astronaut because of my tolerance level. Eventually, we had to go, you point the plane from 10,000 feet, you point it directly at the ground, and you push the rudder forward, you fly at the ground as fucking fast as you can, and then you yank it back and you do a loop. And as we were looping, I blacked out, flew into G-lock, and did, by the way, have a classic near-death experience. Went down the tunnel, all of it. Classic. I proved my theory. I got the experience I was looking for. Here's the thing they didn't bother to tell me. G-lock and extreme gravity will make you sick as a dog.
Yeah.
Sick as a dog. I had the flu for about a month. Driving home from that airport, I was like, ooh, I don't feel so good. Like, I was nauseous while I was doing it anyways, but I was in bed for almost a month. But yes, I did run the experiment, and I did fly a big fighter jet without knowing how to fly an airplane into G-lock.
Wow. Wow. There's so many good ones that you guys sent. I know we're coming up against the clock, so I really appreciate it. I just want to once again mention the latest work. And obviously there are other great books you've written, but the latest one is titled The Art of Impossible, a peak performance primer. Really well done. Great cover, by the way. And that's important. But a great looking cover. It's one of the ones I screenshotted to put in a little folder to send to my publisher. Like, they always say, well, what do you like? And this is one of the ones that I picked. So great cover. Also, obviously the content inside, it's even better. So Stephen, just want to say thanks again for investing your time and telling your stories and sharing some of the details. We covered just a smidgen of what's in this book, and that's why I highly encourage people to take a step further and buy The Art of Impossible, because there's a lot there to help you become a more effective human and certainly leader.
Thanks, man.
Thanks again, Stephen. Appreciate it, man.
My pleasure. Thank
you. All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.